first and foremost, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out this evening. Our mission at NAMIC is very simple. It is our goal to educate, advocate, and encourage the continued multi-ethnicity of the field of communications. And at NAMIC, programming is really the heart of our organization. So in our attempt to make sure that we were responsive to the needs of our constituents, we sent out a survey last year to try to figure out what is it that our folks wanted to have in terms of programming for this year. And all of our folks indicated, one, they wanted networking for 30 minutes, beginning of every event. So our promise to you is that we will always have a networking session for 30 minutes at the very beginning. But also they indicated that they wanted programming that was different, responsive to their needs, responsive to career issues, and responsive to the changing industry. So to that end, we've had some pretty creative programming this year. In January, we had an event entitled The State of the Industry, where we invited Rob Stoddard, who's the VP of NCTA with over 30 years in the cable industry. He came down and provided a State of the Industry, if you will, post-election. Then in April, we had an event entitled When You See the Handwriting on the Wall. And essentially, that session was designed to address those folks that were concerned about how to manage your career and your brand during turbulent times in a turbulent industry. Because as we all know, our industry is changing. We want to be responsive to that request. Last week, we had a breakfast actually hosted by our friends at Cox, and that was for our graduates of the Executive Leadership Development Program. And that was a fabulous event because it provided all of us an opportunity to come together and to fellowship together. Next month, we're actually going to have a social, so much programming, what is something fun? So we're going to all get together, you've seen posters around for a social networking event. And that leads me to our event this evening. One of the things that our member partner companies asked us to do is to provide programming that was more diverse and that would be more reflective of the true state of the industry. So in honor of Asian Heritage Month, Comcast partnered with our Asian Pacific American APA, ERG, and we put on this event entitled East Meets West. And with that, I'll turn it over to Yolanda, who will introduce us to our panelists. Thank you.
I wanted to tell you how excited I am about this program. I started talking about this about February, and I actually ran into Susan up in Philly and asked her would you be willing to come down and do this event. And Jennifer and I have worked closely together for many years, so you guys are in for a treat. The energy in this room and the energy of this panel, you guys wait. Okay, hang on to your spot. So a lot of don't notice something. I know, right? So I just want to do a quick introduction to the panelists and then turn it over to Tina, and then so we can get to the meat of this event. So Mark Chang is the Vice President and General Manager of Noggin, Nickelodeon's direct-to-consumer SVOD service. He currently oversees strategy, product development, and operations for the service. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming down here.
My pleasure.
And Susan Jin Davis, our very own Comcaster. She is the Chief Sustainability Officer. She's responsible for identifying sustained strategies and priorities and for implementing the company's sustainability program across all Comcast business units and functions. Welcome. From Philly, right? And then Jennifer Mirgarad. I've worked with her for 11 years. She's one of my mentors, and she's part of her background is she's actually spent 8 years in Hong Kong working for Turner. Also, the executive sponsor for Turner Asia, which is a BRG, the Business Resource Group at Turner. And Jennifer is the Executive Vice President of Brand Distribution for Turner Content Distribution. She also oversees the affiliate marketing department as well. So thank you, Jennifer, for being here. Last but not least, Tina Simmons, our wonderful moderator for tonight. She is the Central Division Senior Vice President of Human Resources, and she basically oversees everything related to HR, including her passion, diversity, and inclusion. So thank you, Tina, for doing this.
Well, first of all, thanks for being here. Stacy and I, Stacy and Yolanda had an opportunity to speak before about this opportunity, and it really, I mean, I'm so grateful that we have APA, our Employee Resource Group, because NAMIC is such a wonderful organization, and I think one of the missing links, and I talked to Mark about this a little bit, was it's multi-ethnicity, right? But it seems to be uni-ethnicity at many events with NAMIC. So I'm so grateful to APA, to Stacy and NAMIC for making this happen. And thank you to our panelists for being here. I know they were traveling in to be here. And for me, I'm super excited to get to see my friend Susan Davis, who, gosh, probably about 15 years ago or so, we saw each other across the room at a Madonna concert. And then we've been like,
I think I was there.
the rest is history. The rest is history. Yeah, there's a story there. But I said, who is this chick? I said, I love her. So we've got some really incredible panelists, and they've got some really great stories to share with us about their own personal journey. So enough of me, and let's get to them. So why don't we start with Mark? Mark, I'd love for you to talk to us, and I'll ask each of you to do the same.
Sure.
We're going to start with some real meat here, and I want you to share your own personal career journey with us. And don't leave anything out. We want the good stuff. We want the good stuff and the not so good stuff.
Sure. So I grew up, born in Singapore, but came to the States when I was about 2 years old. Grew up on the East Coast, spent some time in New York City and New Jersey. Ultimately went to Cornell University and studied cinema there. Upon graduating through my girlfriend's family, got some jobs in the city, working on music videos and TV commercials. My one claim to fame is I held Jay-Z's leather jacket in between takes of his music video. I'm in the credits there, the music video. I did that for 6 months before I'm like, I think I'm going to kill myself, I cannot do this. The lifestyle was very, very tough. You were booking gigs every 3 days. You needed to book at least like 2 or 3 a month in order to pay rent, and it was just not something that was stable for me. So I ultimately, this was around 2001 when internet was big. And they said, someday you'll be able to put your films on the internet. And I was like, I need to know about the internet. So I bought HTML for Dummies and literally read it cover to cover and got my first job in web design. Ended up doing that at a finance company and kind of grew up in that company, spent about 3 years there where I learned a lot about web engineering. And then one day a headhunter reached out to me and said, you have a really interesting combination of cinema and film while knowing a lot about engineering. And I have this company that he's having trouble finding people with both of those skill sets. And I said, okay, let's try it out. And I can't tell you the name of the company because it's very top secret, it's very competitive. And I said, all right, sounds intriguing. Then they said, go to Times Square at 5 o'clock on this day, and I'll call you and this is the internet bubble, like, no one wants to reveal what the job actually is. And so I got the phone call, and they said, you're going to go up to this address, you'll be interviewing with MTV. And so MTV at the time was having a very hard time finding engineers who were really good. They were really just getting musicians that had mixtapes that were just trying to get in there, and once they get in there, they try to pass it around. And the combination of my finance, engineering background, and media was what drew them to me. And I interviewed with MTV and then Nickelodeon. MTV, they both offered me a position, but MTV didn't have the space. They're like, we're renovating. And I was like, I need a position now. Like, there's no way I'm going to let this go. So I ended up working with Nickelodeon. Started there as a web engineer. And met this project manager who just kind of said next to me. And I was very just open about liking films, liking video games, pursuing all these different things. And that project manager, who was freelance, ended up getting a job as the director of all Nickelodeon websites. And he would occasionally check in with me just to see how I was doing. And then one day he reached out and said, I have a position that I think you'd be great for. I want you to run product development for Nickelodeon casual games. I need somebody who has an engineering background, who loves the media, and just loves the medium itself. And apparently, because I just thought he was a project manager and told him about how many hours I loved playing video games, he remembered me. Ultimately did that well, and was ultimately tapped to work on a stealth project that turned out to be Noggin, the company's first subscription subscription service. And after doing the product management on that so well that it took off, he said we kind of need a general manager now. And it seems like with your background in media and engineering and having done this project, stealth project of bringing to market launch, we think you're the guy for it. And that brings me to today, basically. So I would tie those things together and say that like my first job was through personal contact, right? Like that network. Second part of that journey was I need to learn something different, picking up a book and just reading, right? So defining yourself. I skipped over one of my plot points where I went to business school, but again, business school. Sitting next to a project manager and just being exactly who you are and wearing your passions on your sleeve. He remembered me and said, I think I've got something for you. So those are kind of the themes that I would say contributed to the
I
journey.
love particularly the fact that there was a skill that you needed in order to really do what you wanted to do. You went out and got it. You weren't waiting for someone to, send you to school. You picked up a book.
Yeah,
You figured it out.
yeah.
And it, right.
Yeah.
I like it. Okay. Why don't we're going to skip over to Susan and we're going to go to Jennifer.
Good, because I'm not
Nice.
going
I
out.
I was thinking, my story was okay.
So I'm making stuff up.
I gave you an opening
Right.
for the whole Madonna thing.
She doesn't remember the concert.
That's the story.
Right, that's the story.
Very true.
So yes, I'm not going to go back as far as Mark. I think I'm going to just start. I was working in Atlanta a while ago, and my husband at the time had always been very interested in Asian culture. He actually was a minor in Japanese in college, and had always wanted to get to Asia to work. And he ended up taking a job, actually starting a company that was going to take him to Hong Kong. And so I quit my job here in Atlanta. I worked for actually Cox Enterprises at WSB-TV, which is a broadcast. I mean, people who live here know what that is. Quit my job and moved over to Hong Kong with him. And got there and knew no one. I mean, literally no one. But started to try to figure out, okay, how do I have a connection with anybody here? And it turned out that Turner, which is based in Atlanta, I didn't work at Turner, but based in Atlanta, had their headquarters for Asia Pacific in Hong Kong. And so I called around, do you know anybody in Turner? Do you know anybody in Turner in Asia? And it turned out that I actually did know somebody, knew somebody, and I made a phone call and got my foot in the door. It took a long time to get a job. It took like months and months of interviewing. And at the same time, I started interviewing with other international companies. I actually think I talked to MTV when I was starting out. The job that I got at Turner was taking a step back because I was new to that marketplace. I had been working in the United States for 5 years, but had no experience in Asia Pacific media. And was also not in the field that I was in. I had been doing research here, media research in Atlanta, and I ended up going into a job, an entry-level, what's called a sales planner, basically an entry-level sales job. Did that for only a year before I got promoted. So it ended up being a good thing. I mean, I didn't necessarily see it at the time, because I sort of had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I'm taking a step back. I've been a manager, so it was almost 2 levels down. But I had to get my foot in the door, and I needed a job. So the great thing about that opportunity was that Turner was growing its business in Asia, and it was just at the beginning days. And so that provides lots of opportunity. If you're dedicated and a hard worker, and you're excited to learn, I was given lots and lots of opportunities. And so over the course of the 8 years that I was there, I was promoted multiple times. I ended up, I was SVP, I don't know what my exact title was, but I was an SVP by the time I left. And I basically did a job that covered all of Asia Pacific. So I went from India to Thailand to Singapore. We had a big office in Singapore, Malaysia, Northern Asia, so South Korea, Japan, and then all the way to Australia. So it was just an amazing opportunity, and during the course of that, I got divorced. So the other interesting thing was that after I got divorced, my parents, who lived here or in these states, not in Atlanta, were sort of anxious for me to come home. They thought it was crazy, kind of old-fashioned. You're a divorced woman by yourself over there.
And you're not Asian.
I'm sitting in Hong Kong, no children, thankfully, so there wasn't that to. But I was feeling a lot of pressure to move back, and so I started interviewing at Turner, and the opportunity that I found was actually a similar theme. It was going down in title. They let me keep the money I was making. That was important. Maybe I shouldn't share that, but my boss's executive assistant is sitting in the room. But they did allow me, bridge me on the money. But I took a title decrease because I was also coming back into a media business that I knew nothing about. I'd been gone for 8 years. A lot of stuff had happened. And I was culturally, so I had culture shock going to Hong Kong and experiencing all of the Asian cultures, and I know we're going to talk, I could add some relevancy in terms of lots of different cultural things, but coming back to the United States, my culture shock was almost more drastic and shocking, because I think if I moved somewhere like New York, it would have been easier, but I was moving to Atlanta where it's not at all, it's a big city, but it's not a walking city. It's not the same kind of thing. And I had a hard time adjusting. I actually quite like it now, but it took a long time. And so here in Atlanta, after a few years, Turner launched our own, what we call business resource groups. And Yolanda was the chairperson of Turner Asia, and she was the one who got me involved in that group and said, hey, you have an interesting perspective. You know a lot about different Asian cultures, but we'd love for you to get involved. And I'm still to this day involved. I was telling her, I think they need to get rid of me. Our current chair is here. Because I've been involved now. We were trying to figure it out. I think it's 9 years. So I've been doing that for a long time. And so heavily involved in the diversity efforts at Turner, not just on the Asian American side, but across all of our projects.
You are the poster child for inclusion. I mean, that's something that Matthew and I and the rest of the team, in terms of our employee resource groups here at Comcast, we focus on inclusion. If you don't necessarily identify with the demographics of a group, to join it anyway. It's a great way to learn.
Turner Asia has done a great job with that, and especially of late, trying to, if there's some reason why that group is interesting to you, learn more about it, because that's when you learn about each other and you talk about what you're each going through and the different perspectives you have. That's where the growth comes from.
I keep joking that the young professionals still have not invited me to join them. So Susan, why don't we close with you on that?
Sure. Well, beyond little known fact, Beyonce is my best friend. So I actually have done more than carry the jacket. I kind of hang out with them.
Not that we're competing.
Story. So my career is probably a little less interesting, but nonetheless, for me, I found it fascinating. I started out working for the Pennsylvania Attorney General, and I was actually in an enforcement role there, where my job was essentially to go after big companies for consumer protection violations. So I cut my teeth doing that as a lawyer, and I caught the eye of one of the companies that we were going after, and somehow got a job. So basically that ended up bringing me to Washington, D.C. for an entirely different kind of job, where I worked on the policy side of the house at MCI Communications Company, now Verizon. Ouch. And at the time, I worked for an executive who came from the Clinton administration, had worked for Vice President Gore, and my job was to help him create the kind of policy that would help the company be competitive in a non-competitive market at the time. And so we'd go to the White House, we'd work with the administration, we'd work with Capitol Hill. And now bear in mind, I had no Washington, D.C. experience at the time. But I happened to have, for whatever reason, got caught up with this executive who took a chance on me and said, you know what, you're a hard worker, I think that you should work for me. Little did I know, how much I'd have to work for him, because he was basically a workaholic and he worked 24/7. there were often times when he would say, come in my car with me, I need you to brief me on this issue, I'm gonna meet with Gore, so just drive with me to Baltimore, because I'm meeting him, because he's meeting with some constituents there, and then you can take the car back as I'm going with him, and we're going up to New York, and I'd be like, so I would drop everything and literally go in this car with him, brief him, and then come back by myself. So it was that kind of job, but the learning was really amazing because it was all about politics and the way policy was made. And the way it used to work in Washington was sort of an interesting interplay between, the agency of jurisdiction, which was the FCC, Capitol Hill that could use its authority to create legislation, and the administration that would kind of create the policy environment for what all of these entities were basically working towards. So that's how it used to be. I think it's a little different now. But I learned a lot there, and from that job, I ended up getting recruited away by a Silicon Valley company that wanted to establish a Washington, D.C. office. And this was 3 guys from Intel that had a great idea about something called high-speed internet service that they believed should be mass marketed to consumers. Because at the time, it was primarily used for commercial purposes. And the telephone companies were selling what's called ISDN service, which was literally it was like minutes of use. So they were making a ton of money on that. And so these 3 guys from Intel, who were just kind of crazy entrepreneurs, went to each of the telephone companies and said, you've got this technology called DSL, which by the way now is called, the slowest speed on earth. But at the time it was high speed, as compared to dial. Some of you who are old enough remember the come on, you got mail. So they went to all the telephone companies and they were like, you've got this great idea, you've got this technology, the internet's going to grow, it's going to explode, you've got the technology right there, you've got lines in every home, you're going to make a mint, and you're going to, the internet could be your next big business, as opposed to this antiquated telephone service you have. Well, none of the telephone companies were interested. They were making too much money on ISDN. They were like, that's just a stupid idea. No, thank you. And so these guys were like, well, why don't we just do it ourselves? Why don't we put equipment in all these telephone companies' facilities? Let's just wholesale high-speed data to internet companies. So AOL, or like in the old days, all of these internet companies. And so they did it on their own. The only problem is that they didn't have the legal basis to be able to do this. They would have to get access to telephone company facilities. They'd have to get access to customers. I mean, it was a whole legal battle. So that's why they wanted us there. So it was literally me and 2 guys working literally out of our trunks. We had no office. We would meet at restaurants. And we were filing things at the FCC. We were going on the Hill and lobbying different members of Congress and trying to get legislative support for, sort of market opening types of provisions. I don't want to get into the details of it because it's too boring, but the bottom line is that we ended up, just 2 guys and me, ended up getting really far with a lot of legislative work on the Hill and with the FCC. We ended up creating some new policy and sort of market opening rules from the FCC during the old days. So that's how I got into telecom and technology. But what was really great about being in a startup is, if anybody has been in one, is everything and anything goes. Because I was like the 18th employee, and so it was like, if you got to run to FedEx to put something in the mail, you're running to FedEx. Yeah. If you're gonna, you may have to go to a central office and help the engineers put equipment in it. You might have to go up to New York and sit with investor relations and help them, sell your business plan to investors and analysts. Whatever it takes, you do. And it really was an incredible learning experience that allowed me to experience all different types of parts of the business, number one. And then number 2, sort of, being in an environment of risk. They didn't care if I had no background in this. They're like, well, you're a warm body. Yeah. You're not stupid. You can walk and talk. You can do this. And so that sort of entrepreneurial spirit, that anything goes, risk-taking, was a really good experience that I really took very seriously. So we did all this really great work in Washington. So that I somehow met some people from Comcast, just through the work that I was doing, policy work in Washington. They're like, why don't you come up and talk to a couple people? And I was like, I don't want to go to this cable company. It's so boring. Like it's all state. It's this big company. It's Philadelphia Conventional. Who wants to go there? But I was like, okay. So I went over there and I did some informational interviews that can only be described as the tan death march. It was like from 9 o'clock until, and by the way, I'm not really good without lunch, but there was no lunch. So it's 9 o'clock to 2 o'clock in half an hour increments, meeting the head of corporate communications, the head of government affairs, the head of communications, the head of the business unit, the CFO. They kind of had me going all around and meeting everybody for a job that didn't exist. Because I happened to meet somebody who thought, oh, she's cool, let's find a place for her. And I just indulged them. And so all afternoon I was going through, and the people I was interviewing with had no idea where they were used. We had a really great conversation. These were not unimportant people. These were like people that actually had like important jobs. A lot of great, in fact, one, Jeff Smith actually said to me, what the hell am I talking to you about? I was like, I have no idea. But anyway, he really likes jazz and cigars and good bourbon. So that was but the bottom line is we went all the way till 2 o'clock. Not good. I become like the Hulk if I don't eat. So I'm sure that the last couple hours did not go well. So I was downstairs about to eat a bowl of soup, and I literally was like young Frankenstein. I had a spoon about to my mouth when this executive who brought me here, pulls this reluctant executive into this restaurant and said, Susan, you need to meet her. And it turns out that this was a woman who was the new general manager of our voice business at Comcast. We were just getting into voice. She was like, you need to meet her. She needs you. You need her. She's awesome. We need to find out how to get her here. There is no job, but I think you should hire her. Oh my God. This woman was like, I'm actually trying to start a business here, and I don't even know why I'm saying. This woman wants to eat soup. And it was the last interview of the day, and it turned into a job.
Wow.
Where my regulatory, legal, policy background and my knowledge of the voice market and the internet market would help her because she was starting a business that was not a core business at Comcast. Didn't have a background in a highly regulated, highly scrutinized area or product. And so my job was to kind of like run interference and both like inform the product people, what are the things that we're going to have to work on. We have to have 911 service, we've got to blah, blah, blah. We have to meet all these obligations, privacy and all that, and then work with the lawyers and public policy people like Stacy so that, we were doing the right things there. They were taking down the FCC. So it turned out to be a job that was never really a job in the first place. And as this executive, Kathy Agiris, moved up at Comcast and got more responsibility, so did I. So, my career here has been about sponsorship. A very important executive somehow was forced to hire me, didn't know why. I created a job for myself somehow, and somehow she decided that this was a value add to her job, and as she moved up in the organization, I did as well. So my last job there was, I basically had to operationalize all of our compliance obligations. If you work in the cable industry, and listening at Comcast, that's a big job. And so I did everything from piracy to privacy to 911 to all the things that were happening around cybersecurity and working in the same job I had always had, but had really amplified on it as she moved up to be eventually the CFO of Comcast Cable. So then this year I started a new job, which is Chief Sustainability Officer, the first of its kind at Comcast, because the company recognizes that we ought to do this. We ought to be a good citizen. We ought to take measures to be least impactful to the environment. It's the right thing to do. It's consistent with the core values of Comcast. But at the same time, it's a really good business proposition because we'll be more operationally efficient. We'll be able to reduce costs of the business. Our employees want to work for a company that does things like this. Our customers will buy from companies if they think they're doing the socially responsible thing. There's no bad thing out there. So I went from fire drills, and when people would get my phone calls, they would wince and say, I've got to talk to her because otherwise I'm going to be in trouble, or the company's going to be in trouble, to a very positive, uplifting type of mission to the company, including NBCU, Comcast Cable, and Spectacor, and working in a new group, but again, sort of using some of the skills that I've learned all along the way in order to sort of amplify what I'm doing on my job and try to drive value and try to work with all these different stakeholders within the company and outside. So it's been an interesting ride. And Beyonce helped make shaping my career all the time. She's 35 and I'm a little older.
Bitcoin is that was pretty much my career, and it's about taking risks. It's about sponsorship. It's about learning, getting yourself out of your comfort zone.
And the diversity of skill, I mean, you have a unique set of skills.
Yeah, and I had the attitude, why not, as opposed to why. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it's ill-informed, but some of it ended up working out. You know what I mean? And I think you learn through errors, you learn through failures.
But I mean, would you say that everything actually worked out for even the bad stuff, kind of worked to get you to this point here?
I think the bad stuff helps you grow. So yeah.
So let's talk about the bad stuff, and I'm going to start with you, Jennifer, because as I was listening to your story, I thought, well, this actually would be a very good question for you. So have you experienced any impacts or hurdles in the industry due to your heritage? And I'm particularly thinking of your 8 years in Asia, and that being, I mean, that must have been quite, the heritage and agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. So interestingly, before I moved to Hong Kong, I had experienced some mild, I would call it mild sexism. Just it wasn't overt necessarily, but I kind of, it never impacted my career. There were some things that might have made me a little uncomfortable. So I moved to Hong Kong, and for those of you who don't know, it's a very cosmopolitan, very international city. Our office, it was probably, when I got there, it was probably 60% foreigners, and that would be foreigners from Australia, Caucasians, let's call it Caucasians. But by that,
60%.
probably that many. Now, small, but over a fairly quick period of time, Turner's policies changed, and it became much more Asian. And so by the time I left, it was probably more like 80-20, and now it might be even more like 90-10 in terms of only 10% foreign and the rest Asian.
Yeah.
So when I first got to that office, it was not particularly. It was interesting to work with a multinational group of people. It was all different nationalities. A lot of Hong Kong Chinese, a handful of other Chinese people. But as my job evolved, I had a job that, as I said, took me to lots of different places in Asia. And depending on where I was, I had to deal with a different set of circumstances. So you would go to South Korea, and as a woman, you're pretty much dealing with all men. The only women that were there were the secretaries. In the business setting, at least, and in my business experience, it was all men. And because I was a foreign woman, I got respect, but I never really felt like I was part of the club. And it involved things like business meetings over dinner where there was an exceptional amount of drinking. I mean, just like, and I'm a fairly small person, and so, I would try to a little bit hold my own, but never ever get out of control, because it wasn't, that's not my nature. But the gentlemen that I was with were certainly drunk. I mean, always. I mean, just doing shots, and I mean, it was not exactly what I was particularly used to. Other nationalities or countries that I visited, I felt very, very foreign. China, I think, is the hardest place that I've ever done business. It was also very male-dominated. And I'm not going to, I can share lots of stories. You can call me later and hear some very uncomfortable situations where I'm the only woman, except for the mistress of the man we're doing business with, who is a starlet. I mean, these are things that you just don't find in the United States. I mean, just
Was she nice?
no English, and I didn't speak Chinese, and she was not part of the conversation. I mean, she was just there as arm candy. Yeah, and it was very clear that she was the mistress, or a mistress, not, he could have had many mistresses, and he was a very powerful media mogul, and we did lots of meetings with this guy, with an interpreter, because he didn't speak English. I had a Chinese guy working for me who could communicate communicate with him. But the things that I can't, you might have seen in the 1950s or 40s or something. I had some uncomfortable situations in the Philippines, frankly, similar, where I was hit on by somebody that I had done business with earlier in the day, called my hotel room. I mean, things like that you just, so I have to, going through all of that,
And mainly this is with the people I'm having to sell to.
it wasn't, I never had any issue with anybody that was on my team or the colleagues that I worked with, but the people we were doing business with, I often found myself in uncomfortable situations. You really learn from that, and you also approach you have to think about what are the cultural norms in this particular situation, and how do I present myself to them? I mean, and those are things you learn as you go along, and you have colleagues who've been there before you,
And I wonder, do you apply kind of the United States puritanical kind of vision on some of these things versus, I mean, you know what I mean? It's just
you have to, in a situation where a guy is calling your room and say, hey, do you want to, I should be downstairs. I mean, I'm just going to say no thank you. I'm not going to be rude. I'm going to tell my male colleague that I think maybe you should deal with this particular guy.
Yeah.
He was an important, he had an advertising agency in the Philippines. But it was not, but for the most part, so those are examples, but for the most part, it was a pleasure learning the good stuff about all of these cultures and being exposed to so many different things, and also managing a very diverse team. And that's the other piece I wanted to just touch on, is that I had pretty much every Asian background working with me, in addition to Australians, Brits, Americans on my team, and having all of those people in the same meeting, and how different communication styles, and so coming back to the States, I kind of felt like I couldn't throw anything at me. I mean, that whole stuff. It was less complicated, but I think I was also at a stage in my career where it was all extremely exciting, and I was not afraid. Fear. I wonder if I was put in that situation now, if I would be more afraid than I was in my late 20s and all through my 30s. So that's. But I can talk for hours on it. I have lots of stories.
Oh, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
We're going to get the seaside.
Well, the only other thing I'll say is that there wasn't. So now, okay, you think about Roger Ailes, and he just died today. So it brought to mind the stuff that he was accused of. I had some similar situations, but I would never have. Well, because they were my clients, first of all, I don't know what I would have done about it. There was never any thought about going to HR, or maybe I mentioned it to HR, but you kind of just had to. And it makes me kind of sad, that there wasn't anything I could do about it.
Yeah.
Part of the environment. It was, it's more of a norm in certain cultures. It's not, and it probably is better now. I should say that. This was a while ago.
Right.
But
Wow, that's pretty good. So, Susan, how about you?
Well, it's kind of, actually, Mark and I were talking about this question. What's interesting is you don't know what you don't know. So I don't know what I didn't get an opportunity to do because I didn't know about it.
Challenging part.
But I think early on in my career, I suspected that stuff was going on where I wasn't. So I was not in the room where it happened, right? And I noticed early on in my career that there would be a group of guys, white guys, that would go out with the white boss for drinks after work. And I wasn't invited. And they were really buddy with each other. And I wondered what was going on besides the drinking. But I mean, because let's face it, as you get to know people personally, we're human beings. Then we start to like people better because we know them as people. And then we start making decisions based on the fact that we think they're good people and we like being with them, and working with someone that you like and you like being with is really kind of a nice thing to have. So early in, I noticed that A, this was happening outside of work or around work. B, I wasn't part of that. And C, I had to figure out some other way. Because as a female, too, you don't want to be that girl. that's out drinking with the guys. I mean, it's a very different dynamic for women. Women have to think about that very carefully about those opportunities, and they can't necessarily do what the guys do. That's just sort of like a rule that we kind of all know, right? Besides my mother killed me. I didn't like life. But in all seriousness, you realize early on, there's some circles, there's some venues, there's some things that I'm not going to be able to do, or I don't want to do. So we have to find another way. And the other way I found was, I run, and my boss, the Clinton Gore guy, was just starting out running, and he's not going to go to one of the dudes because, of course, he's got like a dude thing going, and so he's running, and he's not going to like run with a dude that runs, So he's like, let's go with the woman. And so we asked if I would run with him, and I thought that was kind of awkward because I did it for fun. But then I realized that all along every morning when we would run the mall, that we would not only get to know each other, but we would actually talk business. And so the amount of information I would get about what's happening in the company, what's happening in DC, what his mindset is, who is he thinking about, what is he thinking about, those kinds of things were shared in that loop as we ran. And we got to know each other better, and it ended up being a benefit to me. But I didn't do it thinking, I kind of did it as an agent. Your mom says, listen to your boss. And my boss was like, do you want to run with me? I was like, yes. No other answer. So no other answer. I was like, I do. Yes. It turns out that was, opportunistic, and it was maybe another way. It wasn't drinking with the boss, but it was certainly a way. So I think you learn that you need to make those connections, but you may not be able to make the connections the same way as others do. So that was a learning. Did I miss anything? Because we talked about that.
No, I think that was it. I mean, my takeaway from that same conversation was that you just don't know. It's not overt, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes they might not even know that it's a cultural thing. I mean, I agree with you that it wasn't until I reached maybe the senior director level, the VP level, that you start to qualify for all of these business trips, team building assignments that go out, and you realize how much bonding is actually done outside of the office over dinner, through drinks, through shared taxi rides or plane rides to places, and then you realize that there's how much actually takes place and how valuable that direct contact is with other people. I'm very fortunate to work in a place like Nickelodeon that is incredibly diverse in so many different ways: men, women, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and all of that. And maybe it is just my area of discipline too. Like software development and working with creatives, in order to succeed, you need to always be looking for the next lead and somebody who's thinking differently. And a company and a culture that does that correctly knows that the best idea doesn't always come from just the right person. And because of that, in order to stay successful, that guy had a really interesting idea, let's bring him in. And so I think that there's, at Nickelodeon, we're fortunate in my area that there's that level of effort. What I would say though is that if you just remove ethnicity and race for a second, as all of us move up from entry level and you start to master your own, right? But things change. You move from someone who executes to someone who then kind of takes direction. And then you finally achieve this level of management where you're like, I am simply achieving through other people. And in order to do that and know that my livelihood at work is solely entrusted in achieving through other people, there needs to be a lot of trust, right? And now bring race back. You look back at the LA riots and unpack how much anger was just kind of festering in that. And you take a simple example of Korean grocers and working and setting up shop in black neighborhoods. And I read this article that kind of unpacked all that. And they interviewed both sides. And the Korean grocers would be like, we are trying to be as respectful as possible with our clientele. We don't look them in the eye because it's disrespectful to look them straight in the eye. They would interview the black neighborhoods and they'd be like, these shop owners don't have the decency to look them in the eye. Right? It's respect when you look each other in the eye. And so think of how completely misunderstood who they were, and they see each other every day, they're not even talking. And now just come back to corporate America where you're like, I need to achieve through people, and I need to trust these people, and if you don't have like, you don't appreciate that diversity, you're not able to come about it, then how much more can you actually blame somebody who's like, I just get along with that person so much better and understand them that much better, right? So it just kind of highlights the need for ranking panels like this, for us to understand each other, you know?
And I'm wondering, have you, on that kind of point, have you all, any of you felt left out of the diversity discussions, that you feel that, they don't really, it's kind of a black thing, or it's a, or it's a female thing, and it's, and I'll ask you that one.
Absolutely. I mean, Stacy and I met each other when we went to an executive leadership program in United.
That's 14, but that's the best.
Oh.
Just saying.
I think I was the only Asian male there. Maybe there's two other Asian males. Is it? It's great. I think the short answer is yes. And the realities of the history of this country just highlights. It puts, I think, a spotlight on the position of Black America and Asian America, which is has its own set of issues of the vital minority. What do you have to complain about? Like, what are the actual issues and all that? It can create some difficulty. Just like, yeah, I agree, because at the same time you're like, I don't want to make it seem like I have the same exact issues, right? But I still have some. So the short answer to your question, I think yes. It wasn't until I did NAMIC that I truly kind of realized almost the value in workshops like this and having discussions.
I think that's kind of the next great opportunity for us as a people, and that is to recognize that just because others have pain doesn't minimize your own. It's kind of everybody has their whatever those issues have to be, but it doesn't minimize mine because you have something.
Well, I'd like to amplify on the model minority bit, because I think that is driving a lot of people's perceptions of Asian Americans in corporate America and whether diversity programs are even needed for them. And it also drives, I think, behavior on the part of Asian Americans who think, well, we're not like them. We don't need special programs and help. And I think the convergence of those two things end up being a disadvantage to Asian Americans because we are left out of the diversity dialogue because we suppose we don't need help. But if you look at the numbers, and I talked about this earlier, Silicon Valley, 17% of Silicon Valley tech companies are Asian. 17%. Well, 5.5% of the U.S. population, or 17-18% of the population of employees in tech companies. But we're not going anywhere in these companies. It's not like I'm seeing an attendant increase of executive levels. You should be seeing that. If you've got the numbers, then why aren't we making it? That tells me that there's a problem that needs to be solved, but you can't solve it if you're not included. And so we're oftentimes, the conversations that I'm having and others are having with executives and other people in the industry is, don't forget us, because we too have issues of exclusion, of discrimination that need to be addressed through programs and through education and awareness and a deliberate plan of action that would include, unconscious bias training and everything else. Because these things affect our receivers. And as executives, if you think that Yolanda is the model minority and the worker bee, then she may not get that promotion because she's just been working. She's not really leadership material. She doesn't really need any extra help. We just want her to keep doing what she's doing. But Tom over here, he's awesome. Let's promote him. Let's do stuff with him. So I think that is a problem.
One of the things we very well is in order to change management, one of the first things that has to happen is awareness. And so to your points, if no one's talking about this, there's no awareness of it, and you can't even address it because we didn't know. And I wonder if that's been an issue because it has been so undercovered. It's not something that necessarily we hear lots from the Asian community, Asian communities about how they're being in school, you don't really hear about that. It's kind of quiet.
Well, I think part of the problem is there's 24 ethnicities that encompass Asians with African Americans.
It's not monolithic.
So it's not monolithic, but unfortunately, we all look alike. So we're going to be judged sort of monolithically, even though we're not monolithic. So we're sort of treated the same, even though, because apparently I look like, Honey Chong.
So Susan and I, we have a running, like I said, it's been like 15 years. So my best friend is half black and half Japanese. And so Susan and I say, she's friends, she's Malaysian. She jokes, we joke, that Susan and I, if we had a love child, would be my best friend.
She's very good looking.
So I want to make sure we've got good time here, and I want to get into some of the good stuff too. I want you all to be able to weed them with seeds that they can plant and water and grow. So talk to us about how do you make choices regarding your family life? And talk to us about that. How do you do that? We talk a lot about career, all the travel, work, investment, time spent, hours. How do you make sure that you live your life?
So I had a couple of things. I think as I have grown in my career and in my level of work, I've grown in maturity in terms of trying to take care of myself. And I'm more confident in being able to say, I'm leaving at 5 o'clock because I'm going to go to the grocery store because there's no food in the house and make dinner for my family. I'm going to make that decision. And when I was a manager or even a director, maybe even a VP, I just did not have that confidence. I was too busy looking at the people next to me and where, what time are they leaving or those kinds of things. And so that's been easier for me. As a leader of a fairly large team, I want to set an example to make it easier for people to have lives. And that's something I can control. And so for my managers and my coordinators and my assistants and my VPs and my SVPs, I try to show that, okay, I'm leaving, I work out, I'm a runner. About 2 years ago, I made a big commitment to get more healthy, better, more physically fit. I'm probably the fittest I've been in 15 years. And that was a commitment I made that means that I get up really early, and that's why I'm exhausted by about 5 or 6 o'clock. And I need to get out. I need to get out of the office because I'm not going to be productive. And so I model that, and people see me do that, and I hope it gives them the freedom to do that and feel that they can do that. And we're always connected. We're always connected to our devices. They can always reach me. But I think it was me realizing I can pass that on to people who work for me. I didn't have that confidence at that age to have the ability to take care of this.
Well, the young professionals will invite you to their It doesn't really matter about you being in the office, right? I mean, they are always on.
That's right. And exactly.
I think some of us do it to ourselves, because if you ever notice how women leave the office? Yes. They announce it.
Yeah.
I'm leaving early today. I have to pick up my daughter because she has a back to school night, and I'm going to be available on my phone, and so call me, and I'll on my computer. And I swear to God, I will continuously work throughout the back to school program and afterwards. I don't even pay attention to that. Just basically announcing that you're
Very well
leaving, announcing, justifying why you're leaving, and assuring everybody that nothing is going to get dropped during that time that you are spending with your family. You ever notice how guys leave? You'll never notice. You have no idea where they are. They may not have even come into the office that day. So sometimes you just gotta leave.
That's right. That's right.
Mark, would you agree?
Stand up for your.
Like, bye, I'm leaving, everyone have a good day. Blah, blah, blah.
That's great.
Well, I'd say I'm extremely fortunate to work at a place like Digital. when I first started at that company, I was married, and my wife and I had come out of, I think, a 5-year span of infertility, and had just placed our first application for adoption. And we've got 3 kids, all adopted. It's great, and what I found in Nickelodeon that I just truly love is how much they put kids first. You know, their mantra and mission is to make the world a more playful place for kids. And I've been fortunate to have found them, or to have that headhunter find them for me, essentially, because they truly believe in that. Their work-life balance is very, very good. I feel like working on creating apps for kids, a couple of things. One, at the end of the day, no matter how stressful it is, getting over this or something, they're like, look, just making kids laugh. It's not. No one is going to die. My wife's position, like, nobody's going to die if they get the app like 1 week ago. Right? In regards to like work-life balance, because we care so much about kids, we have juice boxes lying around, goldfish crackers, anybody who needs to put their kids in, they love it. And it's a place where I can just show up and say like, the nanny bailed on me, so we have 3 kids if anyone wants to test. And suddenly, instead of this wall of shame, like, oh my god, I've got my kids here, you've got people crawling out of their office, hey, can I test something with your kids? You want to get this feedback, I'd love to hear what they think about. And so it is great work-life balance. They really believe and really what their mission is. And so I've been fortunate that way. And it does help that, like, when you're at home, or if you do have to leave early, you're like, hey, I'll play with the kids and let's put some apps on it and let me just see what they like. I bring home pre-release builds and see what the kids like it. I interview the kids' friends, like what shows do you watch, like what apps do you play with, and so there's a lot of like, I don't feel guilty. I'm like, I'm spending time with my kids.
You're going to need to switch to MTV as I get a little bit older.
The 10-year-olds are already a little bit like that.
Now you gotta stop.
Yeah.
Is everybody in this room saying, boy, does my life suck? I'm so professionally jealous right now.
Sorry.
So in our last few minutes, and this is going to be my last question to the panel, because I'm going to open it up to questions from our audience here. So what's the best career advice anyone who's in their whoever wants to comment first, and then best career? Or if you would rather simply what's career advice?
I'll jump in. For me, I think it was, and I give this advice all the time, right? Don't be afraid to go lateral, to try something new, to build your career experience. I've done that a bunch of times in my career, and it's always worked out. It's always worked out. Because if you're good at your job and you're confident, it just gives you more connections to a different part of the business. And it's often hard to just go in a straight trajectory in your current sort of division or department or whatever.
Which could be further up in
Oh, absolutely. I think for me, the best advice I got was perception is reality. So I got in a dispute with another person in another department. They misunderstood me. They didn't have all the facts. But they came to a conclusion that was not what I could do. And we were at an impasse. And no amount of proving was going to change this person's mind. And it was getting more and more frustrating, it was getting more and more escalated, the relationship was definitely getting damaged. And the boss said to me, listen, and I put it out like it's a good lawyer, look, A, B, C, D, look at all this evidence, I'm right, they are wrong, the emails, there's like a binder. The boss was like, because of course it creates problems for the boss, right? If you have a relationship relationships are important, everybody. But what I learned from it, what she said to me is, Susan, it doesn't matter if you're right. But he perceives this, regardless of what is the reality, and it is the perception that you must manage and address. So you're trying to prove him wrong and have him suddenly say, you know what, Susan, you're right, I'm wrong. That's never going to happen. And you're just going to keep escalating your relationship with him. So it was actually really good learning that that's what you manage to. It doesn't matter what you think is the reality, what you want the reality to be, what the reality actually may be, but it's really about the perception. You hope that the perception and reality are close, but when they're not, you have to deal with that perception issue and address that. That's a little bit harder.
Let's see. For me, I'd say it can be very much like an Asian mentality to look at work as put your head down, do good work, you'll be rewarded. You know, and if you look back at just like things like the Cultural Revolution in China, it is very much like it's different from American culture, which is like very much values like you just simply start with what type of stories are popular in different cultures. The American story is the individual who stood up and fought for what they love stories like that. You just look at like Hong Kong or Chinese cinema, it's usually the opposite. The person who dared to be different and then died at the end miserably. Those are the popular films that come out of the and just think about that for a second when it comes to our careers, right? Putting your head down, doing the hard work, yes, no doubt. But for that little extra bit, there's gotta be a little bit more, I think, of like, did you just see what I did? Like, can you give me a chance to do that? And that's what I want. And I mean, I think that's part of it. And then I would
Great
just echo.
example.
Yeah.
I was talking to Yolanda about a situation with a person on my team that caught up in exactly that.
Yeah.
And when somebody told her what was happening, she realized, okay, I need to stick up for myself.
Yeah.
She's a Vietnamese woman who had the exact same issue.
And I'd say that's particularly important when your parents are in this, because you do talk to your parents. Just put your head down. Don't make a mess. Like, you don't want to stand out, you know. And that's almost the exact opposite. Your parents are giving you the exact opposite advice of what you actually do. You know. And then the last thing I would just echo is you said about the treasure. When I first started at Nickelodeon, I left the finance job. I think it took me maybe 3 years to get my salary level at the same place. So I had to take it. And again, sometimes the Asian parents are like, "You did what? You took a job where you got paid less, like." And you got to break that a little bit. And I think some of it.
I think those are all parents.
Maybe I'm just thinking of my mom. I'm not sure. And I think some of that is really like betting on yourself, right? Like a lot of other people might not make sense, but it's something that you really want. You know, look at that. I'm betting on myself. Like that. If I get in there, maybe I take a dip. Give myself 3 years, and I'm going to be that much better at it because I love the work that's good.
So this is your once in a lifetime opportunity. So ask a question of this.
We're not being invited.
I was gonna say.
Never seen. So this is really we got one. Yeah.
I was going to raise 2 hands, but I can't too much.
Go ahead.
So, and for each one of you, including you, Tina, so looking back in your career, what is one thing you would do different, and how would that impact it now?
Well, I think the reason why
I did not have Jay-Z on my side, so
the reason why I find that very hard is that like you really try to frame all of your experiences.
That's
What is
exactly what I was thinking.
right? Like,
I really have a great pain tolerance and also a great way to suppress those bad things. Because I like to try to be a positive person. I'm sure there are probably lots of them. I mean, but it'll just take me a little while to come up with what it is.
I mean, I would just reframe. It's like when you're at the interview and they're like, "What's your biggest weakness?" And you're like, "It's organized." Sorry.
I work too hard.
So I would say wait. There's like so much, you know. Try to play every single scenario, and you're really not sure, but like I can't point to any particular event in my career, but I feel like it's a recurring theme. That, like, Mark, why did you wait so long before you made that decision? You should have done that before, you know? And maybe if you reframe things by saying, like, look, by the end of this year, I just want to know whether X worked or not. Like, I would be happy going into the New Year party at the countdown, just saying, that's not an unknown anymore. I know that was a bad idea, or I know that was a good idea. For me, maybe one of them was that I didn't mention my career in my first question, but I just finished directing, producing, and selling my first feature film. It took 4 years to do on as a side gig, and there was for a period of time where we were really just like, should I do a Kickstarter, like crowdfunding thing, and just don't know what to do. It's a good idea. But it finally just hit this one day in November where I said, whether it's a public failure or not, I want to go to the end of this New Year party saying, I know exactly how to do or not do a Kickstarter campaign. And so we ended up doing one and successfully raised $65,000 for film. So it's reframing some of that stuff. I just want to know, value learning, and maybe that will help you.
That's great, that's great.
I have one now, because I've thought about it. It's a great time. I think mine would be that there are times in my career where I could have been more aggressive. And I think it goes back to not wanting to appear to be that woman that's a bitch, or it's that it's a female thing working in my head. And I think that's hurt me at times. I'm successful with whatever, but I wonder if it's at certain points in my career, if I had asked for that raise or I pushed a little harder, I might have been in a better place.
I would say that I would probably try to be a little less hard on myself, because I think when you come from a place of exclusion, where you're always sort of looking in and saying, I hope I get in there, or I hope they pick me, or they'll never pick me, or I don't really belong here, so I've got to do extra to prove that I'm really awesome because I'm not naturally going to get chosen, and they may kick me out anytime. I think I wish I would have let myself off the hook.
Yeah.
Because I think that voice in the back of your head is not good, because it's self-doubt and it perpetuates itself. And I think that for a long time I've sort of lived in this, I've got to show them that I do belong here, versus I actually do belong here. Because I'm good at what I do, and I know a lot, and I'm likable. I love myself. It's horrendous, like lack of self-esteem. But I think it really is sort of a characteristic of people who just are not in the inner circle. And I think that happens to women, and I think that happens to people of color. And sometimes it can be our worst enemy, because we tell people how to treat us sometimes, and how we behave and how we treat ourselves. So I think that's probably what we try to work on earlier.
And you act as if you don't deserve and have not respect.
Yeah, there's that actress, is it Mindy Kaling? Is that her
Oh, yeah,
name? Mindy Show? Yeah, about that.
yeah.
She wrote this really interesting article about entitlement, the word entitlement, which is like, it gets a bad rap, in politics, what entitlement is. But she linked it to being a woman and being Indian in a career. And it's the same thing with what she was saying. Like, no, I deserve it. And I'm entitled to actually be here because of all this hard work that I've done. And the amount, you think of the amount of time that any of us may spend just like psyching ourselves out because of that, while there's someone else there who's doesn't have that mind game. Like, they're just thinking about their job 40 hours a week, and we're thinking about psyching ourselves out 20 hours a week. Like, of course we're not going to do it, as well.
They're so carefree.
It's like running a marathon with like a backpack and not a
You got a lot of back.
Yeah.
when everyone else is just running the marathon.
That's right. That's right.
I defer you runners up there. How about another question?
Oh, that's something. Hello, everybody. My name's Ethan. You guys have been wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. My question deals with the model minority myth and the Asian culture. So, this idea that Asian parents tend to teach or tell their kids to be obedient, okay, to this, whether it be to their superiors, to their elders.
Sure.
How do you change that culture? How do you change the mindset? How do you tell these Asian parents, hey, perhaps you should be telling your kids to be so obedient. Perhaps they need to be more aggressive once in a while, to stand up for yourself. Teach your kids to know when to stand up for themselves. Because if you don't, that can hurt you in the corporate world, it can hurt you in all these other facets of life. Okay? So how do you change that culture, and what are you guys doing? You guys are very successful professionals. What are you guys doing in the Asian American community to help facilitate that change?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't think that you need to change yourself to be successful. I mean, I think that that's very unfair, and I think that's not necessarily the right way to think of things. So I like to take some of the values that have been instilled by my parents onto me and Americanize them. So, for example, the obedience issue. Obey your authorities. Obey your boss. Well, your boss wants you to speak up in a meeting. Okay, your boss wants you to add value. Your boss wants you to engage with stakeholders, be actively involved in the project. So to me, it's recasting some of the values that we have, as opposed to saying, I can't be me. I can't be my values the way I was brought up. I'd rather think of ways to recast those values and be positive. And I think that's a lot about minorities and women in general, that we think of ourselves as having these crutches and these disadvantages. In fact, we have a lot of things, if engaged, can be incredibly powerful. We do have to prove ourselves more. We do have to show up better. We do have to be more educated. We do have to have more results. But that's a good thing. Okay, that means I'm better. That means I'm better than him. And I think that's one thing. I think we also need to teach our parents and the first generation in America that that we do need to recast those for the next generation so that they don't feel in conflict with their values. I remember early in my career, I stood up on some grandstand and was like, I attacked my school's administration for the lack of diversity. I was on television. And my parents were appalled, horrified, and thought that I was going to ruin my life and my career because of that. They're like, stop talking! And I had to explain to them that if I didn't talk, then we wouldn't get an opportunity. We would be left out. And when I spoke to them that way, they understood that that was the vehicle to be heard. So I think we just need to continue the dialogue. How about you?
Well, what's the question? Was the question how would we recommend people deal with their parents?
I felt like it was more about how you
Well,
pass
as
on.
parents, how did it change you for your kids?
That's great. How do you do with your kids?
Yeah.
How do you kind of break that down?
Because you're raising them differently, right?
Yeah.
In some ways.
I mean, I don't know whether one, I'd say I don't know whether I'm actually totally true to that agenda. So I'm not sure I'll make that. But like, if you go back to stories I was referring to before, what is the typical American story versus like other cultures? I think it comes through in discussion with kids sometimes, and it's not always. I love talking to my kids about work because they ask me that. So I'll say, this is what I'm trying to solve. This is what I'm trying to figure out, and it's a little less. I realize looking back, if you ask the question, that it's not. I'm trying to do this with my boss. It's a problem that I'm having. It's rarely what the boss wants me to do is rarely part of that conversation when the kids ask me about work. So maybe it trickles into that a little bit.
So look, why don't we are right on time? Why don't we give a rousing round of applause? It's incredible. Thank all of you for being here. We will, right? Be doing more of this. I'm glad we'll be doing a social also. Everyone here is invited to the social. Come on down. Can't take your place, but and why don't we turn it over to Stacey and close us out?
So again, thank you to this incredible panel. And Wanda and I first talked about how ABA and David had a partner, and we said, wow, let's pull a panel together. And so again, thank you so much for coming down. And for all those that are not members of NAMIC, this is just a taste of what's to come. So I encourage each and every one of you to A, go to the social, but B, come on back for some other events. We have more events planned for the balance of the year. And just feel part of the family. We need all of you. Thank you.
And join, if you're a podcaster, join APF.
Yes, absolutely. So anyway, thank you. Thank you. Have a great night.
Okay, hi everybody. I just finished my panel in Atlanta, and the thing that I want to leave the group is to underscore what I think the importance is of having Asian and Asian Americans actually participate in NAMIC and in these affinity groups, because I think that there's actually a lot to be learned. And more specifically, it might not immediately become clear to you how much you can learn from participating in these groups until after you've done it. And so that's the thing that I would
Thank you so much. So hi, thank you for joining NAMIC Atlanta tonight. But if you could please tell me your name. Yolanda Zhu with Comcast, and your name, ma'am. And if you could please tell me, what did you enjoy about tonight's event?
I think it's just, the panel was very diverse, and they had some great experiences and learnings for us to learn from and share, really. And just those little insights give us some great tips as we move up in our
by the time we did the third one, the other two were,
I think one of the best thing about these types of events is the networking aspects of it, and then the connection that you built, right? Was able to bring this event together, and through networking, we were able to find these great panelists and be able to form this great event tonight.
Thank you so much. Ladies, have a good night. And your name, please?
My name is Fabian Di Rosario. I am the national president of NAP, the National Association of Asian American Professionals.
And your name, please?
I'm a financial advisor with Ashford Advisors.
If you could both tell me, what did you like about tonight's event?
The energy.
They're just so positive people. They're positive about. Remember when they were asked the question, "What's a regret that you have?" And they were stumped. They were stumped because they said that everything that they go through, they have reframed it in a positive way, and I think that's a great lesson. It's a great lesson for me. That you could be given a lemon, but you can choose to make lemonade out of it.
Exactly.
Just to sound a little cliche,
that's
It's about how we frame our journey through life.
the mindset you have.
It is about mindset.
We all have that kind of struggle. Oh no! It's kind of impact in your life. And that's a conversation they had really encouraging.
The power of tonight's program is in the authenticity of the stories that I heard. The stories were obviously very personal, and they were deep, and they had enough detail which allowed me to actually live a little bit of the journey, the challenges, the decision points that these individuals had to make. And I loved it. I was able to relate because of those details with certain parts of the story. I really enjoyed it. And this group of people, look, they won't leave. They won't leave. Nobody is leaving. The program's on.
Thank you so much, baby.